In Nigeria today, economic policy isn't just something discussed in boardrooms or behind government doors. It's lived in the price of food, the fuel at the pump, and the naira in your pocket. It's the difference between opportunity and despair for millions of citizens. But who are these policies really serving? Are they empowered or built to empower the average Nigerian, or are they protecting the interests of a few? Today, we're cutting through the jargons and getting to the heart of the matter, the real-world impact of Nigeria's economic decisions in its people, and what the road ahead must look like if we're serious about inclusive growth and accountability. This is where I welcome you to Politics Uncensored, where we tackle the tough topics, challenge the status quo, and uncover the hidden narratives that shape our world. On Politics Uncensored, we strip away the spin and get to the truth of Nigeria's political landscape. Our goal is to provide a platform for open and honest discussion where experts and everyday citizens can share their perspectives and insights. Of course, it's your favorite show, and we have an expert guest who will be joining us soon. I'm your host, Okikiola Taiwo Jalukmo, a proud member of a new generation of leaders, young, bold, and unapologetically committed to redefining the future of governance in this great nation. Today, we're digging into a topic that affects every one of us, Nigeria's economic policies, what they really mean for citizens today, and what they mean for our future. Every of our episodes is all about you, so be part of the conversations every single day and add your voice to the discussions. You can head on to our YouTube channel at Official Upgrade TV, hit that subscribe button, like, share this link, and invite your friends and family to join the phone now. Our phone lines are also open to you. Please call us on 070-2500-7749 and 070-1424-2420. I want to hear what you have to say. We'll go on a break right now. We'll return with our guests and take our top stories in the political space making headlines. Please stay tuned. Well, you're still watching Politics Uncensored, and today we'll be discussing Nigeria's economic policies. We're going to be trying to understand Nigeria's economic policies and its impact on citizens and the future. And joining me is someone who's not afraid to speak truth to power, Basil Abia. Basil Abia, who is the co-founder of Veriv, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Veriv Africa, a research and advisory company and a research and policy consultant supporting think tanks, startups, and public offices in Nigeria. Basil, welcome to Politics Uncensored.
Thank you, Okikiola. Always a pleasure to be
yes.
on Upgrade TV.
How are you feeling?
Well, it can be better. I can't complain though, but it can be
I
better.
like that. So usually we are supposed to go straight into the topic, but I always like to hear your perspective about some of the news, political news making headline in the story. So before we go into that, let's look at some of the Nigerian news, Nigerian stories making headlines. And one of them is June 12th, President and Nigeria differs on progress and impact 32 years after. And the story here is saying, I cannot champion one-party rule, President swears, resists one-party state plot, PDP urges Nigerians, not yet bye-bye to hunger and poverty, says Adewale. And in a rather symbolic replay of fate, the same somber suspense and apprehension which defined the June 12, 1993 historic election also pervaded the celebration of June 12 as Democracy Day yesterday. And President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's decision to reschedule the programs set aside to mark the day raised public skepticism amid plans by the Take It Back movement to hold a nationwide protest against hardship and bad governance. And in many states across the country, it was an anticlimax as there were no significant activities, no protests or solidarity rallies to commemorate the 32nd anniversary of the annulment of Nigeria's freest and fairest elections. We have so many people talking about what it meant for them. And I think on one story, Obi is asking Tinubu to end impunity and respect the rule of law. And I'm sure you know who Peter Obi is. He said he lamented what he described as a steady erosion of democratic values and worsening socioeconomic conditions under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's administration. We also have Dixon faulting Tinubu over failure to restore democracy in Rivers State. We all know that Rivers is currently under the state of emergency, and Dixon is saying that President Tinubu has failed to restore democratically elected government in Rivers State. And if we recall that as at 18th of March 2025, he announced the suspension of Governor Simi Fubara and the rest of the member of House of Assembly. Atiku is also saying what is happening is not governance but conquest. Former president has said that who was also a member of the SDP in 1993 was more scatting on the declining standard of democratic governance in the country. He lamented, saying that instead of governance, it was a conquest that was at play. And this is many people's opinion about the June 12th celebration. But I would love to hear from you, what did June 12th mean to you as a yesterday's celebration? And this is also in relation to what the president has said so far and some of his critiques.
Yeah, so first and foremost, there's no doubt that there's been an erosion in most of our democratic gains. One typical example is the lack of democratic governance at local levels. So local government levels, for instance, we cannot term that as a democracy. It's just, an installation of people who are there as lackeys to the governors, because obviously the governors have usurped all of the powers and autonomy that local governments have. Now, I do know, of course, that the president is very intentional about ensuring that the local government administrations in Nigeria finally get their financial autonomy and thereby basically getting full legal autonomy back. And there is now backing by the Attorney General of the Federation and the Minister of Justice to ensure that all of that is put into place. And there's already a framework being created by Central Bank of Nigeria, in conjunction with the Office of the Attorney General of the Federation and the Minister of Justice, to ensure that every single treasury account for all of the 774 local government areas are set up and they are separate from the fangs of state governments. We know that even when it is implemented, the state governors have basically or are full charge of the election or how these local government administrators got into power. So they would get into a sharing agreement. But we do know, using the law of autonomy, just common sense thinking, is that when you finally have access to your own bank account, whether you like it or not, after a few years, you would move away from being a slave, to just pushing away the slave masters.
Yeah.
So with no time when that structure is put into place, the local governments will be very stubborn and ensure that their finances are to themselves and not to be shared with state governors. Now, that's a good start, but as it is, to answer your question, local governance is the first utility for us to look at whether democracy is being strengthened or is eroding. And we can categorically say that democracy is eroding at local government levels. At state government levels, we have seen the usurpation of an democratically elected governor in Rivers State, using, of course, the guise of national security with the declaration of state of emergency. And we know that this is because the presidency took advantage of a legal loophole that was laid open as early as the President Olusegun Obasanjo's administration, when they declared state of emergency twice in two different states, particularly that of Plateau State. And we all know what happened afterwards, including that of Ekiti, if I'm not mistaken. We all know what happened afterwards. It created a precedent where presidencies can use the guise of, maybe insecurity or misappropriation in that sense to be able to usurp the power. However, what did not really happen during the President Olusegun Obasanjo's presidency was a direct suspension for that long, and then we saw that happen with River State. We know that there was also a suspension of the then governor of Plateau State, Joshua Darie, and the installation of Jerry Hussaini, Lieutenant Colonel Jerry Hussaini, retired as the military administrator, which of course started off the precedents. but we know that there's a bit of distinction with that of Rivers State, because the state legislature were also, the entirety of them were also suspended. The local government officials, the administrators, all of them were suspended as well. So this is unprecedented in that sense, that decision by the Bola Ahmed Tinubu presidency to usurp the powers of all of these, most of these local and state administrators who were appointed by a democratically elected government. And even the local government chairman also went through a democratic election, while not free or fair, because obviously we know that all of them won the elections thanks to the powers of Governor Sim Fubara. But it still has to be said that the democratic gains were eroded in those elections. And that's the case in many elections. You can use the Akwa Ibom State local government elections as a template. All the local government areas, bar one, where PDP, then PDP local government chairman, because then the governor of Akwa Ibom State, was a PDP governor. He has now switched to APC. It's expected that all the local government chairmen will switch to APC. And the only APC local government chairman, of course, will stay back at home. So it means that Akwa Ibom State at local level is going to be a single party state. At a state level, it will also be a single party state. So we can do a deep, comprehensive X-ray of democracy from just the semblance of elected representatives to even the shrinking civil space, the civil society space, where freedom is no longer, something that you can be rest assured. You can criticize the governor and see yourself in jail, as was the case and still the case in Sokoto with the young woman who is still incarcerated just because she posted criticisms of the governor. And it's the case everywhere. It's not a Sokoto thing or a northern Nigerian thing or a southern Nigerian thing. It's a Nigerian thing. People are witnessing a shrinking civil space. Our journalists are not free. Journalistic freedom or press freedom is shrinking as the days go by. Engagements with our own elected representatives are shrinking. FOI, Freedom of Information Act implementation is currently being eroded. You cannot, as a journalist or as an interested party, for instance, go to any MDA and request through a letter, salient information or data that you need about certain things. You're going to find it really difficult to have access. Or the other option would be that they will intentionally frustrate the entire process and keep you waiting for as long as 2-3 years till you give up. So this particular state of governance that we call democracy, is it really a democracy? Is it really strengthening? And I'd like to disagree with the president and his speech to the nation during the joint broadcast at the National Assembly complex yesterday, where he said that democracy was strengthening and finding a strong foothold in Nigeria's state of affairs. I completely disagree with that, and there's a lot of evidence to highlight.
Very much. You've highlighted quite a number of issues and maybe given the president some accolade from the beginning, and then highlighted some of the issues that has caused, his administration or Nigerians to be doubtful about his administration. But basically, that's part of the reasons why we have this conversation, so that we can highlight problems, highlight solutions, and also give recommendations in that sense to the president and all his other elected officials in that sense. But basically, that's all we have for the political stories. We'll quickly take a break right now and then return with our hot topic for today. Please stay tuned.
Tell us you're a Nigerian without saying a word. Energy security is one of the most pressing issues for many developing countries like Nigeria. And if there's going to be any meaningful progress, addressing our energy issues is non-negotiable.
I need to see light for my house. Make them do something.
Band A is expensive. I literally have to turn off all my appliances just to reduce costs.
We need light.
Introducing the Energy Outlook, your go-to show for everything energy. Every week, we'll bring you the latest insights, innovation, and in-depth analysis of Nigeria's energy sector. From policy discussions to regulatory insights, we will analyze the key decisions influencing growth and sustainability in the energy sector. We'll bring you the human stories behind the headlines, giving you a personal perspective on the broader energy challenges. Join me every Friday at 6 p.m. for the Energy Outlook, your guide to the future of energy, where energy means business.
Thank you for staying tuned. If you just tuned in, we are discussing Nigeria's economic policies, its impact on citizens and the future. And of course, we have Basil here, who is, so lovingly joined us to discuss this very critical issue. And first, I was looking at the economic policy for the people. We're asking, is it for the people or the powerful in that sense? But let's start broad. When people hear economic policy, it sounds like a technical or distant statement. So if you could help us or people listening, can you break down what Nigeria's economic policies actually are and how they directly impact the lives of ordinary citizens?
Policy is a technical term, there's no doubt about that. So it's quite difficult for everyday Nigerians or everyday citizens, global citizens, to really catch up. But economic policies has to be clearly defined by people so that people are able to understand. These are just the ways that an organized society, like a country like ours, governs their economic life. Your day-to-day, your fiscal markets, and then your non-fiscal markets. And what's the definition of a market? A place where there's a lot of trade, buying and selling of services or goods in that context. So we are all in the market. I, as a consultant, I'm in the market because I sell my services, my knowledge production and synthesization services. And then there are people in the market who want it, like corporations, who get to buy it by obviously indulging in a contract with me and paying. Mama Yetunde, for instance, in the market in Yanapaja, is in a physical market. She probably has wares, textile, or she sells foodstuff. And then obviously to sell, you have to be able to collect some money, right? You have to engage with middlemen merchants who are buying those raw materials, either from Plateau State or from Kaduna State, or even importing them from as far as China or as close as Semi-Border in Benin Republic. These are examples of these markets. There are other forms of examples we can put into, but just to contextualize, economic policies are the ways or the rules that an organized society like a country, puts in place to govern the economic life, the trade, commerce, and exchange of goods and services in a particular country. Now, one very important economic policy is how we are able to control the supply of money, because inflation is the direct effect that people are able to feel, the everyday person is able to feel as a result of the misapplication of an economic policy. So a key economic policy that is contextualized towards the inflation that every Nigerian is facing is the monetary policy that is mostly the prerogative or full jurisdiction of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Now, Central Bank of Nigeria is in charge of printing money or also ensuring that money is supplied to the general economy. Now, money, both the fiscal notes and the non-fiscal notes in that sense. And so, in basic economics, the higher that money is supplied to an economy, the worse the increase in the rate of goods and services gets, which basically means inflation gets higher. So how that happens is in two ways. The more Naira is printed, the more Naira is weakened. And when the Naira is weakened, foreign exchange that we mostly depend on for imported goods becomes super expensive. And so when you are a middleman who is purchasing foreign exchange related products like textile from China or food from Brazil or wheat from Ukraine and Russia, you're paying for those goods in dollars, right?
Yeah.
So that Mama Ramota can access the final products when the goods come to the Tinkan Island port, and she's going to get her wares to set it up and continue to sell in Ladipo market. So if the foreign exchange increases due to the overprinting of the Naira, Mama Ramota now has to increase by 10 or 20% her costing because the middleman, probably give him a name called Femi, the middleman who has gone to China to buy those textiles, has to increase because foreign exchange is now very expensive. Sometimes you can't even get it from the BDC because of the scarcity of that foreign exchange due to the overprinting of the naira. So when Mama Ramota now eventually buys that those textile wares at 10% higher or 20% higher, she has to be able to equalize those losses that she's taking from buying the bulk purchases. And how do you do that? You increase the cost of the textile material. Now, this is how every rational agent in the economy, and in economics, a rational agent is just basically anybody who is participating in the economy. So you are participating in the economy as a consumer. You consume food, you consume water, you consume knowledge services, you pay for Netflix, you pay for the internet, and occasionally whenever there's Owambe, or you just want to look good, you go to Ladipo, or you go to your WhatsApp textile merchant, send her money or send him money, and they buy the goods for you, and you now go to the tailor for them to tailor it, right? So in the context of using Mama Ramota, she's going to have to increase the cost of her textile wares. And then the other people, the WhatsApp commerce people, the WhatsApp textile sellers, folks that have their own smaller stands in places like Badagry, those who travel from as far as Kano, Yola, Uyo to come to Ladipo market and buy those wares, they will also have to increase their own costs. And so the direct consequence of this is that everyday Nigerians who want to buy textile from Mama Ramota through Mama Ramota's supply chain will have to pay more. And if they pay more, strictly, that affects their pockets, which basically means they will continue to complain that, oh, no, things don't cost you, or the economy is really bad. Now, you can do that for as many things as the energy policy, which also is part of the economic policy. The energy policy, for instance, would be whether you want to increase the price of PMS. Now, in the context of this, we can now use another very important example that Nigerians can relate to. When President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was sworn in as the president, in his acceptance speech or his inauguration speech, he made a very simple phrase, one very powerful, simple phrase. Fuel subsidy is over. And what happened? A direct consequence of that mention was NNPC did not even implement the policy that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was directing for. Just that mention, people already flocked to all the filling stations across the country. And there were fuel queues immediately that evening and the next morning. And so the next morning when NNPC announced their own policy direction as the sole market maker in our energy downstream sector, also our upstream and our midstream sector, they basically put up the market price of PMS to 690, which basically meant that they were no longer going to buy their refined petroleum products at a subsidized rate because the federal government was not going to give them those subsidies, right? Mm-hmm. And so automatically we had to now pay the international market-based rate. So everything from the landing costs of these refined products from the refineries in India to the refineries in Belgium, Romania, and in Rotterdam in Netherlands, we had to pay that cost. That's why whenever the dollar gets super expensive, automatically when you look at it, both the fuel cost from Dangote refinery that many other downstream petrol retailers are now using to the ones that use the refined products from NNPC are always increasing. And then whenever the FX is reducing, you see that there's always a reduction from 900 to 800. I think it's about 800 per liter now. At some point earlier this year, it was around 1,000. At some point last year, it was around 1,200. So that's, you can see that it's more swift. The change in price of PMS is swifter than before because there is no longer a complete subsidy program that subsidizes our petroleum product usage, unlike before 2023, when we had a subsidy regime that was bulking billions of dollars every year. So I don't want to go too long, but these two examples are examples of economic policies and how they directly impact. Now, just to complete the explanation of these, downstream petroleum policies that comes directly from the presidency but goes to NNPC for implementation, is that because, and I mentioned these important statistics from World Bank, over 90% of the logistical volumes of Nigeria is carried out or borne by our roads. The remaining 10% are from our rivers to the seaports and then, of course, via train, via our rail systems. So if 90% is taken by the roads, then what are the vehicles or the units that you use to convey goods, services, and people via these roads? They are buses, they are cars, they are lorries, they are trucks. In the context of how we do food logistics or food transportation in Nigeria, most of that is carried by those huge lorries.
Yes.
And huge trucks, right? Now, these trucks are powered mostly by diesel, and some of them are powered by or fueled by PMS. Now, the internal city food logistics, when the food finally comes to the border markets between Ogun State and Lagos, and then the other smaller retailers are going to bring in the tomatoes or the potatoes from Plateau State, or the millets, sorghum, and Mali from northwest Nigeria, and the rice from northwest Nigeria. They use trucks that are PMS fueled. So that is why whenever there's an increase in PMS price, a swift increase in PMS price, almost every single good or food, both imported and locally produced, increases, because they'll tell you the cost of transporting these plantains, for instance, from
But Basil, at this point, the government has argued that these reforms are very necessary. Some of these problems that you have highlighted are necessary, but of course we all know that Nigerians are struggling. I'm struggling, I can say that for myself. I know that transport costs have gone up, just like I've mentioned. Food prices have also
I'm struggling with
skyrocketed.
transport costs.
So, of course, but in your view, you've highlighted these things, but do you think that this was the right policy, talking about economic policies now, or it was just poor timing? Because I remember very well that in 2023, quite a number of candidates were talking about fuel subsidy removal as one of the first things that they were going to do. And immediately the now president announced it. Everybody started going against that. No, this was not how we wanted it to be. There should be like a soft landing, something about that. But do you think that this was the right policy in that sense, or it was just poor timing? And if we really look at it, who benefits most from these moves? Nigerians want to know, because when they say that economic policy is, it's to help Nigerians, they are wondering which of the Nigerians, the elites or, the average Nigerian in that sense. So I would like you to answer that for me.
Yeah, it's a great question, but the answers are not straightforward. And you need to explain to more detail so that the audience, Nigerians, everyday Nigerians, are able to understand. Now, in the context of how we govern ourselves financially, the subsidy regime was affecting our usage of oil revenue earnings, because the bulk of our oil revenue earnings from NNPC. NNPC will just take full advantage of it to subsidize, to pay, to ensure that they offset the subsidized downstream petroleum products like PMS, aviation fuel, kerosene, and diesel. So it was important, and all of the candidates were right. It was important that that subsidy regime would end and would introduce subsidy to more productive parts of the economy. For instance, subsidizing food, subsidizing agricultural inputs like fertilizers. They're very important. Many countries in the world, especially in the US, for instance, the US is the most capital country in the world, most capitalist country in the world. But they heavily subsidize their farmers, and they heavily subsidize farming inputs to make sure that food supplies are super cheap. Now, if you look at the context of calculating Nigeria's inflation, it used to be 51%. 51% of Nigeria's inflation rate was composed of the aggregate computation of food prices. That has now obviously reduced to 40% because NBS, the National Bureau of Statistics, which is the #1 body for calculating recording and calculating Nigerian statistics like inflation, for instance, and GDP, decided that because of a living standard survey that they carried out in 2023, the results showed that Nigerians were paying at least 40% of on average, at least 40% of their earnings for food. Now, this varies by states, because I know in Sokoto, it's over 90% of earnings for food. And then in Lagos, it's over 30% for transportation. For some Nigerians in Lagos, over 60% of their monthly earnings that they spend on transportation. And that's why whenever there's a PMS price increase, it affects everyday Nigerians because transportation is also a core part of what you spend your money on every month. Now, back to answer your question in depth, like I mentioned, it was very important for the timing to be right because, again, you have to look at the historical context. Fuel subsidies or energy subsidies were introduced into Nigeria in the 1970s directly under Murtala Mohammed's the late General Murtala Mohammed's military regime. And since then, till date, till 2023, over 45 years, if I'm not mistaken, we have basically been feeding off those subsidies. So you need to wean us off. Basically, government has to wean us off. Look at us like babies. You know, when you're trying to wean off a suckling baby, it's always a battle the first 1 month, right?
Of course.
Sometimes some nursing mothers go as far as putting pepper, you know, to make sure that the baby just gets tasted by the taste of milk and they run away. And before you know it, it actually works, right? So in that context, I mean, that's probably the most obvious context to provide that people are able to grasp. You should, and even Tinubu mentioned it, he said it was like a surgery, you know, or like weaning off a baby from a suckling mother. Now you expect that time frame to be very short. But you also expect that during that weaning off process, there are palliative measures to soften the landing. Unfortunately, because of how Nigeria is governed across all levels, even if you had provided palliatives like cheaper transportation or subsidizing transportation costs, having a meeting with all the transport workers and saying, don't charge this price, we will pay the offsets. It's very difficult to do that distribution, and it will come at a higher cost to the federal government and the state governments. Secondly, even if you execute it efficiently, the number of buses and cabs that we have in Nigeria is not enough to meet the number of people that actually need them. That's why, you know, public transportation is such a mess across Nigeria. Now, Lagos is actually the best state when it comes to public transportation, and it's still a mess. Abuja is non-existent at all. Abuja is probably the worst city in West Africa when it comes to public transportation. They don't have a BRT. Their bus system is very skeletal. The buses are not up to 10 working buses for a city of active 4 million people who come into the city and move back, because most people in Abuja actually live in the residual towns that are in the outskirts, you know, what they call the suburbs, your Kubwas, your Nyanya, and the rest. Those who live in the city have to pay very high rental prices because of the cost of housing is super expensive in Abuja, which is the same case in Lagos, you know. So when you put all of this into context, there was a mistiming. Now, there was also another problematic situation. There was a combination of all of these liberalization economic policies. And what I mean by this liberalization economic policies was the market orientation of the economy. So our foreign exchange was now going to be market-based because it was now a unified foreign exchange rate, and it was now based on a willing buyer and willing seller mechanism, right? So that means that, or that meant that people who used to buy FX, dollars or euros or pounds from central bank by, you know, the respect of the fact that they were connected to somebody very powerful in government, buy it at the very cheap rate. So you probably buy, you know, a dollar at 400 naira, and then in BDC, the dollar will be going for 750. I mean, now the dollar is going for 1,500. But then in 2023, it was at 750. If you buy it at 400 and you sell it at 750, the differential is what you make your money from. And a lot of people who were connected to government, obviously they would give their cuts to the government officials, became billionaires of these arbitrage systems, what we call, in economics, we call it arbitrage. Even finance, we call it arbitrage. And so there was a need to sanitize the space, okay? And there was also a need to centralize the foreign exchange liquidity so that that will be able to provide availability of liquidity to investors, both the fiscal investors and the foreign portfolio investors. Those are people who invest in the Nigerian equities market, the Nigerian stock exchange, for instance. Those ones need that liquidity as soon as possible. Now, those foreign direct investors who come in, it can take a while for them to repatriate the capital, which is basically the return on investment of their capital that they invested in the Nigerian economy. So think of yourself as a South African investor who is investing in an agricultural space. Sometimes it will take you as much as 5 years for you to repatriate your first proceeds of your work, of your investment in the Nigerian economy. And that made a lot of South African investors and a lot of non-African investors to leave the economy because it just didn't make sense to spend all that money and not even retrieve your amount. It was so bad that at some point, MTN ensured that MTN Nigeria's profits were kept in Naira. So they were not repatriating anything to South Africa at some point because of how bad this foreign exchange governance was. So what I'm trying to say is that at the same time that they were removing subsidy, it was also the same time that they were reducing the subsidization of our electricity. So basically the increase of electricity tariffs, the balkanization to band A, band B, band C system, which obviously saw a steep increase in the prices of electricity purchases in Nigeria for both the unmetered and the metered Nigerians, Nigerian electricity consumers. It was also around the same time that there was the unification and the devaluation of the Naira, unification of the foreign exchange and the devaluation of the Naira by almost 60%. We saw the Naira against the dollar move from 750 Naira per dollar to over 1,600. At some point, it approached 1,800. We can all remember what happened between 2023 to 2024. Now, like I mentioned, Nigeria's inflation is affected by FX happenings in the FX market because most of our goods that we consume are imported. But we have a food import bill of over $10 billion US every year. So imagine if the cost of FX increases by over 60%, which was the case. At some point, it was over 100%. In fact, it was over 100% actually by June 2023. It spiked up from 750 to 1,400. So it was a complete 95 to 100% increase. That obviously will see a swift transmission of that into the food prices and all of the other goods and services. So for instance, laptops became very expensive to buy. Laptops became expensive to buy. Phones became super expensive. They are still expensive to buy. Imported clothing, imported materials, construction materials, anything that was connected to the economy that was imported became super expensive to purchase, and everybody in the economy had to increase their prices. So back to that point, the mistiming was that you did all of this once in 50 years economic policy implementation at the same time. So it was going to be very hard for everyday Nigerians. Even wealthy Nigerians were complaining. Everything increased. Water prices, transportation prices, car prices, electricity tariffs, PMS, everything, everybody that was connected to the economy, your barber, the person who braids your hair, every single person increased
basically,
the dollar increased.
You have, as I said, you have mentioned quite a number of things, and you've also mentioned how this would have been is poor timing in that sense. While these policies, so what I want Nigerians to know that while these economic policies were important and were necessary for the future of Nigeria, it was just not done right. And you've also mentioned how if there was a form of palliative in that sense, the demand and supply do not match themselves. So it would have been a fail at some point, even if they started. But I remember very well that during the whole full subsidy thing, there's, I think it's lag ride that the Governor Sanwo-Olu introduced to Lagos, and as at that time it was about 50% off for people who use the ride, to go to and fro into different places. So I would say that maybe Lagos was able to, touch on that issue from that angle. And for someone like me who has also lived both in Abuja and in Lagos, I can say for a fact that when you mentioned that Abuja's transport system is extremely terrible, I agree. For about a year living there, I had to use things like ride-hailing apps to just get to and fro from different places. The one time I decided to try public transportation, it was a car, and they put me in front with one other person, and my legs were no longer mine by the time I got down. So I think that was something that I was able to also differentiate that, okay, maybe Lagos sort of has it figured out up to a point, but supply and demand is something that almost everywhere in Nigeria, it's an issue that we're facing, from food, to all that. But you also mentioned spending, which I wanted us to go back to when you mentioned how the government would have spent so much on, maybe creating palliatives to soften the whole policies that they were introducing. So we've seen in the news how trillions have been allocated into budgets, into infrastructure and everything in that sense. But we still see our schools, crumbling, and hospitals are still underfunded, and even civil servants go months without pay. I've seen some people, come into my DM telling me how their company is either going near closure, or they can't even pay month after month. So is this an issue of not enough money, or is money just going into the wrong places? And I'm asking these questions because I know some of the answers that I'm to give, but I want Nigerians to sort of have a perspective from somebody who is at the forefront of getting data for some of these things. So do you think that this is a money issue for Nigeria to go forward, or is it that the money is going into the wrong places?
Yeah, so it's a combination of both. Like I mentioned, even earlier this week on News Central, Business Edge on News Central, Nigeria has both a revenue problem and a spending problem. An earning problem in the sense that we're not earning enough as a country to meet our demands. And an example of this would be that we have an infrastructure deficit that requires at least 30 billion US dollars spent on infrastructure projects every year from now to 2030 for us to reach the levels that we desire. That's basically the infrastructure stock to GDP that we need for our economy. Now, unfortunately, even our complete budget is not up to 30 billion. I think it was just slightly over 30 billion US dollars for the last budget, if I'm not mistaken. Probably be the same case. But the entire budget cannot fit what we need to spend on infrastructure because we just don't have enough. And over 60% of that budget is going to be funded by loans. The remaining 40% are from foreign exchange revenues and internally generated revenue, right? So we have a serious earning problem. But here is the other situation of the dilemma. We also have a serious spending problem. For instance, and this is going to be very controversial, we did not need to spend over 11 billion US dollars on the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway. I do not think we even needed to embark on that project, especially if you contextualize all of our needs on a preferential table. For those who did basic economics, you have principles like opportunity cost, where you weigh what you're going to lose from spending on something and what you're going to gain from spending on something, right? And then you now have the preferential table, or the table of preference, where you order the needs based on your preferences, the needs that you need to execute with money. And money is seen as a finite product or a finite resource, something that is scarce, basically. So because of that scarcity nature of money, you need to prioritize how you spend it so that you're able to yield positive opportunity costs in that context. So for Nigeria, if you have a situation like ours where electricity supply is not enough, industries are suffering because of the cost of energy and electricity supply. Because electricity supply is not enough, they have to spend more to fuel their generating sets to continue producing, and they have to now increase the price of their products because they are spending a lot on diesel to maintain their, to the point where they're even downsizing and reducing the production hours. It's such a problem for the economy. Why didn't we spend that amount of money, that exact amount of money, on just power plants? By now, a number of these power plants and transmission projects will be nearing completion because they are power plants that can be completed in 3 years. There are solar power plants that can be completed in 1 year. There are solar power plants, utility solar power plants that can be completed in 1.5 years. There are transmission upgrades, because we also have a transmission infrastructure deficit. There are transmission upgrades that can be made and executed within the 18 months to 24 months time frame, which if they had done that expenditure, we will be there at that stage where we're nearing completion. But instead, we decided to spread it on the coastal highway. Now, do not get me wrong. Nigeria needs a lot of roads. The state of our roads are terrible. A road connecting the entire south of Nigeria with Lagos is very important to the economy. But like I said, using the economic principles of the scale of preference and opportunity cost, we needed to spend that money on paying the debt that we owe, and we owe over 3 billion US dollars to our GenCos, generating companies who generate electricity for us. We also owe a significant number of debts to gas suppliers who supply our GenCos with gas that they use to power their thermal power plants for our electricity supply. if we had taken some of that money to pay those debts, then take a number of that money to provide liquidity into the power sector, I think we'll be in a better place 2 to 3 years from now. Because even if FX is still super expensive in 2028 or 2029, Nigeria will no longer be doing a daily production of 5,800 to 6,000 megawatts. We'll probably be doing 11,000 to 15,000 megawatts daily, which basically means that our manufacturing industries, our manufacturing factories in Ilipeju, in Agbara, and then, of course, as you know, in Sangota, in Ogun State, nearby Ogun State, and in Aba and Onitsha, and then in Kano and Kaduna, these are all the manufacturing clusters that we have in Nigeria, would now have more than 10 hours of electricity daily. In fact, there's some parts in Kaduna and in Kano where they never get electricity at all from the grid. So they are basically manufacturing using their own self-generated power facilities, which comes at a huge cost.
Just in the news, about 2 days ago, we had when they declared that there was going to be a 4-day blackout in the Northeast, and talking about the scale of preference in that sense, for me, it was just like this coastal highway, while it's a good initiative, did not tally with some of the very big needs of Nigerians. The connection between the South and, of course, the reason behind that initiative, it was something that even Nigerians till today still do not understand, because if you look at the percentage of people who are going to be benefiting from it, it's almost like the most masses do not understand why this is being done. A lot of businesses were lost from that initiative, and a lot of money has been put into it. And you've spoken about light. Personally, from my own area, light is something that might be fair, but I believe that could be better. But we have to take a breather at this point, and then, when we return, we'll go more into the conversation. Please stay tuned. Well, thank you for staying with us throughout this conversation. This is still Politics Uncensored, and we have Basil here, who has been giving us a lot of insights to understand Nigeria's economic policies and what the future holds in this sense. But now we're going straight into talking about the youth. The youth has over 60%, of population in Nigeria, and this is just to start from what Veriv Africa is doing. You work with young people through your organization. What are they telling you about economic opportunity? And I want to know, is this economy working for Nigeria's youth or locking them out?
Yeah, so you're right about it. They're a very fully youth-centric organization. There is nobody who is older than 35 on our team, even the indirect staff that work for us. Now, we just carried out a number of field research projects that we have even released some reports for. We carried out a food price survey earlier this year in February. In May, we concluded a field research project for a healthcare facility in Akwa Ibom. And then in April, we also carried out a local governance strengthening project where we did an assessment of the state of local governance in both Kaduna and Kano State. So we were on the field pretty much with a lot of these young staff, and we also spoke with a lot of young Nigerians during these processes. And I was on the field supervising all of these projects. So I can tell you for a fact that the state of the economy right now is shutting out young Nigerians. Young Nigerians are not able to participate in the economy due to the high price levels. So basically, inflation is still a big concern, a national concern for people. And yet it has reduced their consumption. A lot of young Nigerians are not healthy at all. They're not eating well because food costs are super high. Now we also have the situation where access to the internet for information is even more difficult because of the steep increase in prices of data and phone services by our telephony companies, which of course I completely understand their reason behind increasing it. Because like I mentioned, when you're simultaneously carrying out economic policies like removing subsidy, regularizing and liberalizing the foreign exchange market, you are definitely going to get this, especially when you're not timing it well and when you're not providing palliative measures. And so every young Nigerian that I know is feeling the brunt of these price pressures. Cost of real estate, especially rental prices, has skyrocketed by more than 200% in a lot of urban areas. People over the last 1 year, young people that I know have been complaining that their rents have increased by 100, some even as much as 300%. So some people are now having to share housing, and those who are sharing housing are now having to squat or basically go back to where their families live. And for those people who left far distances, to come and hustle in big cities like Lagos, Ibadan, Port Harcourt, Kano, Kaduna, and Abuja, they are now having to consider going back to the state capitals or the state towns that they went to. So, for instance, imagine if you had to leave from as far as Benin City to come to Lagos. And also, right now, you're thinking about going to your mother's house, or your father's house, or your uncle's house back in Benin City, because you simply don't even have anybody who wants you to come and squat with them, and you don't have the resources to pay the 300% increase in rental prices. So these are the issues bedeviling young Nigerians. Even those who are in business, there's no access to capital. Banks are selling their loans at absurd interest rates, 30, 40%. I don't think you ever get anything lower than 30% interest rates when it comes to loans, market loans. I have a number of business owners who are my friends, especially in the food business, mostly my female friends, and they're complaining on how they've had to downsize, reduce production, sack a staff, or just even completely shut down half of their operations because of the costs of running the food business, and the margins not being enough. And whenever they go to the banks, it is absurd interest rates that they're getting. And when they even go to the fintech apps, the loan apps, it's even far worse there. You're seeing something as much as 100% interest rate.
Absolutely. I tell a lot of people that loan apps are not your friends. They don't have the intention to help you. I know that that's how it's their social media adverts are going, but they are not your friends, and the banks aren't either. I mean, the whole reason that fintechs even became an option to people is because they started showing that there were differences, or they picked a lack in the bank and they started preferring solutions to it. But at this point, they're also going in their own direction. And then almost every Nigerian, I saw somewhere where they say almost every Nigerian is in one debt or the other. It's either you're owing your friend, or you're owing a bank, or you're owing a loan app in that sense. But
Absolutely.
I really want us to move beyond just talking about the problems in this sense. So we're about to wrap up. So if we had to reimagine, Nigeria's economic future from the bottom up, where the average Nigerian is at the center of it all, what would that look like to you? And even beyond that, how can, we as citizens play a role in, ensuring that that vision comes to life?
It's a very tough question to answer. And honestly, I'm not going to want to deceive the audience by giving simplistic answers or saying that these are non-complex problems. These are really complex problems. Like I mentioned much earlier, Nigeria has a revenue generating problem and a spending problem. So the first and easiest step that our governing actors, especially the federal government, will have to take on is to reduce the cost of governance, and by doing that, reduce the size of governance. So if you reduce the size of governance and reduce the cost of governance, you have even a 10% bump in the available resources to work with. And if that 10%, 15% bump in available resources are used just for palliatives, it goes a long way. If they're used for infrastructure development, it still goes a long way. So whichever divide of economic management that you're in, if you don't want to subsidize economic activity but want it to be more productive, that's fine. You ensure that 10% or 15% bump in earnings are used to make sure that inputs and direct services to improve productivity, are provided. What are those inputs? Better roads, more railway for transportation, dredging of our rivers so that people can use boats to ship goods from ports in Onne and Lagos to inner parts of Nigeria. Many of these things, for instance, would be initial steps. And these little trinklets of improvements would compound using the universal principle of compounding effect to compound into better outcomes for people. So, for instance, if we had spent that $11 billion US on energy, we know that by 2029, there will be more electricity supply. At least every single Nigerian household will be experiencing nothing less than 22 hours
Of
a day
power
of
supply.
non-uninterrupted electricity. And
Yes.
we know what that does to small businesses, what that does to even our own mindset. You know,
Yes.
we no longer have to work at particular times in the middle of the night to deliver work. Sleep very well, knowing that if you wake up by 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., there will still be light for us to work. You know, and many other things, like even our consumption. So for instance, we'll buy more meat and milk because we know our refrigerator has at least 22 hours of power supply
Yes.
from IKDC or EKEDC.
Yes, Basil, I really want us to end on a very light note. So I'll say a phrase and you give me your quick take. So it's either hope or hype in that sense. I want us to take it to the youth level. So
Yeah.
Nigeria's 2024 to 2026 economic recovery plan, is it hope or hype?
Hype.
Okay. African continental free trade area, is it hope or hype?
Hope. A lot of
Okay.
hope.
Nigerian tech ecosystem as a job creator, is it hope or hype?
Hype.
Okay. What about the minimum wage negotiations, hope or hype?
Right now, hype.
Okay, so finally, the renewed hope idea, is it hope or hype?
Hype. Even though I wanted to say hope because of renewed hope, but it's definitely hype.
Okay, thank you very much. It was so amazing to have you. Thank you for joining us on Politics Uncensored. This conversation reminds us that politics or policy is not abstract, it's personal, and it's the price of bread, it's the cost of transportation, like you have mentioned, and even the job that you can or you can't find. So thank you, Basil, for joining this conversation. Really, amidst all of these things that you have said, my unfiltered opinion in this context is that economic policy is not just about numbers, it's about people, and it's about dignity, access, survival, and hope. If our policies don't reflect the struggles and aspirations of everyday Nigerians, then they are not policies. They are obviously and categorically punishments. To President Bola Ahmed Tinubu at this point and his administrations, Nigerians are not asking for miracles. We are asking for intentional, people-centered leadership, prioritize social safety nets for the poor, ensure transparency in public spending, invest aggressively in job creation, especially in agriculture, tech, and infrastructure. Please strengthen the Naira, not just through market reforms, but by boosting local productivity. And above all, listen, I mean really listen to the cries on the street and not just the applause in the boardroom. But change doesn't begin and end with the president. It begins with us, with awareness, with pressure, with participation. So let's keep asking the hard questions at this point, and let's keep demanding for a Nigeria where economic decisions are made with the people and not just for them, because Nigeria isn't just possible, it's necessary. So before I go, ensure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at Official Upgrade TV. I'll see you again next week with another wonderful topic. Bye-bye.